Welcome, Cosmerenauts, to this new talk in the CosmereCon 2024. Now we have Janci Patterson with us. For the ones of you who doesn't know her, she's an amazing author. She has written one of the Alcatraz stories, like The Bastille versus the Evil Librarians. And also she is the co-author of Skyward Flight, which is translated into Spanish as Escuadrón Cielo, kind of a prequel between Cytonic and Defiant. So welcome, Janci. Super thank you for being with us in this insanity called the CosmereCon 2024.
Thank you. I'm so happy to join you.
Yeah, I mean, last time we talked, I think it was like a couple of years ago, we were still waiting for the Skyward Flight to be published. So if you could introduce yourself, explain what you've been doing and your books and your
Yes,
works.
of course. I'm Janci Patterson. I write a bunch of different genres. I write epic fantasy, I write young adult science fiction and fantasy, and I write contemporary romantic comedy. And of course, I co-wrote, as you said, the Skyward Flight novellas with Brandon. Those came out a couple of years ago. And also the last book in his Alcatraz series, I co-wrote that with him also. He had written part of it, and then I finished it for him. So that's a little bit about me and what I write.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths that you have in your, like, say, in your style is that you have an amazing way to describe the characters, bring them back to life, and they can express their emotions. It's something that we can notice here in the Skyward Flight. For me, it's complicated because sometimes I think about Escuadrón Cielo, but I'm speaking in English, so it's Skyward Flight. So sorry for that.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's the reason why you may started to work with Brandon, because you can bring this perspective of how is it to be a young person with older. It's hard being in the path of adulthood and learning everything. And I think the work you did with the characters from the Skyward Flight, it's kind of bringing them from being young people into, oh my God, we are facing another thing completely different. And now we are behaving like adults because it's what it has to be now.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah, my background is in young adult. I started out in young adult. It's still my favorite. And to me, that's what young adult is. It's about taking kids who are coming into adulthood and just beginning to have to deal with adult responsibility and being thrust into situations that teenagers should not be in. And then the way that they rise to the occasion and become adults. Sometimes it can make it a little bit hard with a continuing series like this as we're continuing to do more books. I got to keep them kind of teenagers still because we're still in young adult. We don't want to move all the way into adulthood, but they've been through a lot and they have a lot of experience that even the other adults in their world don't have.
I know. And also the other thing is you introduced, so there were some characters we knew just by name, but we didn't have really the chance to get to know them. And so, for example, there is Alanik, who is one of the, let's say, one of the aliens. And it's funny because Spencer, in the beginning, she tried to take the place of Alanik when she went out. And then somehow Alanik had to take her place into the Skyward Flight, and how you were building the world and all the, I'm not sure whose idea was, but all the mythology that we have and we discover in Skyward Flight, it's bananas. It's like, I think we talked about this some time ago, but the first time I read, like, are they talking about Tolkien? And I'm like, are we talking about elves? And then it's like...
Yeah, I took that from Brandon's description. His first description of Alanik described her as elfin, I think, something like that. And I was like, ooh, what if they were the elves from Tolkien? And so that when I'm co-writing a book, in general, most things I'm pretty flexible about. If my co-writer doesn't like it, we can change the plot, we can change the characters, we can change the ideas. But every book, I latch onto a couple small things that I'm like, no, I need this. And that was one of them. I was like, no, let me keep my Tolkien reference. I have to have it.
Yeah, so it's super interesting because when people think about Brandon, they are all into the Cosmere. Whoa, the Cosmere, and there is the Roshar, and there is, of course, the Scadrial and everything. But I would love them to give an opportunity to the Citoverse, because outside the Cosmere, I mean, it's a series on its own. It's an amazing universe. It has really lovely and lovable characters. We will talk later about the Tinics, which are like my most favorite
Yes.
characters also. Yeah. But how would you describe the Citoverse to someone who hasn't read anything outside the Cosmere? Why should they give it a try?
So I also love the Cosmere. I think if you're a Cosmere fan, a couple of the things that carry over to the Citoverse, one is the characters. One of the things I love about the Cosmere is how in-depth we get with those characters and how everyone has their own motivations and desires and character arcs that are more complex and deep than you get in a lot of fantasy. And so I feel like in the Citoverse, you see that same thing. The books are shorter, which could be a plus. It's not going to take you as long to get through them as, say, when you're looking down the gauntlet of all the Stormlight novels. I mean, I love them, but sometimes it's a little bit like a commitment, right? And you can read the Citoverse much faster. But the characters and their growth and their interactions with the world have Brandon's same stamp of the deep character development and the side characters with their own motivations. And then also the world, especially the more further you read in the series, the more the world starts to flesh out. And I feel like it's the most complex of Brandon's non-Cosmere worlds, and I think that a lot of that world building will also appeal to Cosmere readers for sure.
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure how many people is aware of this, but let's say the seed of the Citoverse was into his story he wrote like long time ago. It was the first story, like short story he wrote and was first published in Spanish instead of English.
Really?
It was published, yeah, because
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Defending Elysium, which is like the seed of the Citoverse, like late, early seed, he wrote that story for a science fiction contest we have, particularly in Barcelona. We have this UPC university, and they had, I'm not sure, I think they still do that, but they had like their own science fiction awards. And so one year he was invited to come to give a speech, and he wasn't yet published in Spain, I think. And then the next year, I think was 2006, 2007, I don't really remember. I'm super bad with years sometimes. But he sent the Defending Elysium, and he co-won the first award. And so he was published in a book. And after that, he was published in the Asimov, I think it's 2008, the Asimov magazine in October or something like that. But yeah, and after that, he published the story and he's with his Dragon Steel publishing house. So yeah, and it's funny because the first time he ever left the US to travel to somewhere was here. To this UPC awards thing, and it's like it's super important because there he was introduced by the Spanish publisher at that time, who is no longer among us, but he was the one who discovered. And for me, it's amazing to think that someone he wrote, like, of course, 18 years ago, ended being this. The connection when you read that the first time, you didn't even know about the Krell and this blah and that. And it's like,
right.
And it's the first time they describe like the Cytonic blades. And when you read the books and go back to that, it's like, oh, it was already, but no one remembered. Even me, I didn't even remember because it was completely out of my sight. So this is how much he has been working on this. And now you are also into the Citoverse, and it's becoming more rich. And I wonder, how are you going to, I know that you can raffle us.
Of course.
What can we expect now that the arc of Spencer is kind of closed? What can we expect of the sequel?
To me, the most interesting question going forward, because we started with these humans that were very isolated. And then throughout Spence's story, they open up to know more about the universe and to be in contact with more people in the galaxy that they're in. And to me, the most interesting question was, who are they going to be, right? In the past, the humans have been invaders, they've been at war, they've been accused of being violent by all of these species, and sometimes because they were. But our humans, as they step out onto the galactic stage, what will their identity be? What's their legacy? That's why we call it Skyward Legacy. What will their legacy be? And how are they going to take their place and make a new path for humanity going forward? And so that was what I wanted to accomplish over the series, is to have these kids who were forced into a soldier's life too young, stepping out, looking at the possibilities and making decisions that then are going to determine the future of humanity in the Citoverse. And so I'm super excited about that.
Are we going to see all, I guess, because the way that Defiant ends, and there is this character that she lives and she like escapes them, I guess that maybe we will see her. Is she going to have an impact probably, or is she not going to be involved any longer?
Which character?
Braid.
I have not used Braid yet, but we'll see. Where I'm at with book 1, I've written my draft and I sent it to Brandon, and he's in the process of reading it right now. That means that everything that I put in that draft, like Brandon read an outline, but everything that I put in that draft is kind of something that might be in this book. And I'm waiting for Brandon to get back to me and say, yes, I like what you did here, let's keep it. Or I don't like these things, let's work on what we want to do instead. And so even for me, legacy is a little bit of a question mark right now, even though I've written a book. And so it's hard for me to say like, this will be in it, this won't be in it, because maybe Brandon will come back and be like, you know what you should do? You should talk about Braid, and then I will. So we'll see.
How is it, because we haven't talked about this, but how is it to work with another author? I know that you are super used to that and you love to work with other people, but can you like explain to us, how does this work?
So with Brandon, the way it works is we'll have a conversation and we'll do some brainstorming. He'll give me an assignment. So like with Skyward Flight, he said, Kay, I want you to write some side adventures with these characters. He gave me a list of characters. And then I take that and I put together some ideas, build an outline. I send my outline to him and he reads my outline and says, okay, I like this. I like this. Hey, the way I would do this is actually, and then he'll block out for me how he would do it instead. And it's always better. So we keep his way because he's so brilliant. And then I take that outline and I write a draft and I send him the draft and he goes through, he calls it his revision, but it's basically a red line edit where he goes through and he'll change some words and he'll make a lot of comments of like, this is working for me. This isn't working so well. Here's some ideas of what we could do instead. And then I take that and I do a revision incorporating all of his changes and comments. And then after that, we go to editing and beta read.
So, for example, it feels like compared with other stories you have written, I think that you, in the sense that you are playing in someone else's playground and you are like making this playground your own, but it's different from the stories that you have co-created from scratch with other people.
Yeah, although actually every time I've co-written with people, I was stepping into a world that already existed. When I wrote an epic fantasy series with my friends Megan and Lauren, and they already had that world all built. And then Megan and I wrote a trilogy of YA fantasy books called Sinking City, and she had already written book 1. And the same for her rom-com series, The Extra. She had already written book 1 and I came in and we wrote the rest of the books together. So actually the only way, and then my friend James with the Bollywood Lovers Club, he had written not the book, but he'd written a couple of chapters and had the ideas and I fell in love with it. That was actually my first co-writing experience, was in grad school. I fell in love with my friend's book and then he didn't write it for like 7 years. And finally I was like, hey, you want to write that book together? Because I really want you to finish it. But it was something that he had already created and then we built on. So that's the only way I've ever collaborated, is to step into something someone else has started and sort of run with it. And I love it.
So the Bollywood Lover.
Yeah, the Bollywood Lovers Club. It's about 2 teenagers. It's a high school love story. And she's Indian, she's Sikh, and he's Mormon and has Sikh heritage. And they fall in love. But of course, their religions make things really complicated.
Oh, have you tried to write something about a key drama, like Korean rom-com?
Oh, ha! That would be fun.
We can try that with maybe Yumi and Painter.
Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm not going to go into the yeah, but lately with some friends we are like watching rom-coms and then these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
When you are like stepping into the Citoverse,
Mm-hmm.
on the very beginning, when we first met Spencer, she was like a teenager. She was trapped in the Tritus, and something happens, and she. At that time, she was cheeky, and she has this too much energy, and she wanted revenge. And the way she looked at the world was like everything needed to be solved by fighting. And well, then gran, and then you kind of understand some things.
Yes.
But Spencer's arc has a huge development over the whole series.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, we leave her. She's a child, kind of a child. She leaves the Tritus. She goes to Star site, and then she has the adventure. She infiltrates into the city. I won't spoil too much. And she goes with M-Bots. And for example, I have the feeling that they had serious trouble. And for example, we have this character M-Bot, which is kind of the comical relief. The one who supports her is kind of a friend in some way, like she's like kind of Seal, being there, helping her. And the other characters are also left in the Tritus, and we don't have the chance to see them. And we know about Jorgen, we know about Kimalin and FM and Ned, but we didn't have the chance to see them grow until you pick them up. So how was the experience to getting each of the characters and then trying to drive them into the different paths so they can then be together in Defiant?
So when Brandon gave me the assignment, he gave me a list of characters, and the list of characters was basically all of the living members of Skyward Flight, except Jorgen was not on the list. Alanique was not on the list because she's not in Skyward Flight. And so I went and I read through the books and I made notes, and I was really excited to do an alien point of view. I thought that would be a cool challenge. These are the things that I think when I'm like planning things, that then when I'm drafting, I'm like, what have I done? I thought this would be a cool challenge, and now I got to do it. And then also the reason Brandon didn't put Jorgen on the list was because originally he was just like, just go do a fun side adventure. Our books weren't planned to intersect at all. Right. And this is how far Brandon's plans get sometimes. And then with Jorgen, he had more of a plan in mind because his arc went along with Spence's. Yeah. And so I said, hey, could I write about Jorgen? He's my favorite. And Brandon said, well, you won't have as much freedom with that. This is where I want him to end up. And I actually kind of like not having freedom. I like having a structure and being able to like figure out what I want to do within that. So I was excited about it. But Brandon basically said the end of Evershore, where Jorgen ends up, that was what he told me to do with him. And I spent a long time thinking about it because to me, after Skyward and Starsight, that wasn't a happy ending for Jorgen. That wasn't where I would have pictured him being happy. And so I had to do a lot of thinking about how am I going to take this character from where he is now and make it build something so that that is the happy ending and it is a good thing for him. And that was really fun to be able to work within that structure and figure out how to build that arc. I feel like in the Citoverse, there's sort of two camps of readers. There's the readers who were really disappointed when we left the team behind. And then there's the readers who are really there for Spencer and don't mind as much. And I was definitely in that first camp. I was like, at first I was like, oh, we're leaving these people and I just want to read about them. But then I was like, oh, but I get to write those stories. So then I was really happy that he did that because it left some space for me to get to play with them.
For me, it was a shock. I was expecting them to go together, maybe go together to Starsight. And at some point I felt like, what just happened? I mean, where are they? What's going on? And there are science fiction series where you have the point of view of a character and then you just follow this character and you are wondering what happened with the rest of the fleet, what happened with the rest of the team. And like 10 years later, maybe you get a sequel or something that goes in parallel and say, thank you. But I was in love with them.
From what I understand, what happened was Brandon sort of accidentally made them so lovable. He did not mean for them to be everybody's favorite. And then once he did that, he tried to take them with her. The plan was for her to leave. He tried to take them with her and it just didn't work, right? Because for Starsight to work, she really has to be isolated. And so he just couldn't bring everybody or the story wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, it's because, I don't know, Jorgen is super nice. Ned is also super nice. The way Kimalin helps everybody and how she is like super positive and she is like always trying to have something good to say to everybody until, who was it that was growing a bird? Was it a bird? Was it Ned?
Oh, the mustache? That was
And
Ned.
just Ned. It is definitely not working.
That was so funny.
Yeah. It was so funny. But I was expecting to see more of them and learn more of them. Or FM, by the way, the idea of FM setting their backgrounds, because you see that there is, on the beginning, the Tritus fields, you know that there are different like caves, but in your mind there is only one, the one where Spencer is. And then you bring FM into the light, and then she has her past, and then you learn that they have a different heritage. And even Jorgen has, well, with a name. In a place so isolated as that, they even have like different religions. They believe in different, like the saints, or I don't know, more Nordic things. And FM turns out to be the one who becomes the diplomat.
Yeah, I originally picked her story because back in Skyward, Brandon had teased that Rig was interested in her, and then he never did anything with it, and I really wanted to do something with it. And then she was really difficult for me because she is not super empowered by the situation, right? She doesn't get to make the decisions. Jorgen makes the decisions. And she's not like a Spencer who's going to just run over his decisions, right? She's much more like listening to people and trying to like stay in line. And it's really hard to make that person the protagonist and the agent of the action. And so that one took me a while to like sort of find my footing and make it really her story. But I really liked how it turned out in the end.
Yeah, and then she becomes the champion of the Tinics, the champion of the slugs. And it's amazing to see her doing that. There is someone who really cares about the others. What you see, even though the Skyward original series starts as an adventure, young adventure, by the end, by the time you reach Defiant, there is a lot of humanity and emotions in there. And then because you develop also the Tinics, and we see them as a sentient species, which is what they are, and you want to have 1 or 10 of those at home, it's like you really feel for them, and you understand the situation they are in the story, and she's fighting so they can help them survive. They are in this huge war. They are in minority, but still they really want to help everybody they can. So starting with the Kitsen, and then also I forgot the name for the Alanic people.
Erdale,
yes, thank you. And then I'm always focused on the Tinics. And
yep, you and everyone else.
But then you understand the deepness of the feeling that they have, and the place FM has been, let's say, the role she has been playing has a lot to do with that.
To me, it was a really like an easy step, because she starts in Skyward, she starts wanting to champion people who can't speak for themselves, right? That's why she becomes a pilot, is because that's the only way to get power.
She's an edge dancer. She speaks for the ones.
Yes. And she wants to use her influence to help people, but of course that's not really what soldiers do, right? Like her job is really to shoot people down. That's not what she wants in her heart. What she wants is to be able to stand up for people who can't protect themselves. And so, and Spencer does that too in her own way. And so I like, as we get more perspectives, that we can show that there are lots of ways to protect people, and there's lots of ways to fight for what's right. Spencer does it by fighting, and she grows, and even by the end of the series has more tools in her toolbox than just that. But FM is more the person who wants to speak for the people who can't. And so to me, moving her out of a ship, though it was hard for her, was a natural transition, where the happy ending for her is to move into being able to have this influence and not have to shoot people down anymore.
I remember this scene where, I don't know exactly when it happens, Spencer is thinking that FM, maybe even Bath, with the Tynix, with their Tynix, and someone tells her, yes, she does.
Yeah.
And that they built this kind of thing where they can bring the Tynix with them, and they are like working together. The beauty of the story is all of them thinking that they were alone, as you said, the humans were alone, and then they find others and they can work all together. And it was super fun when we reached Evershore and we discovered the kitchen. How did that happen?
I'm trying to remember exactly. I remember looking at all of these different alien races and thinking like, who do I want? Where should they go next? And the Kitsen are just wonderful. And I love Hesho and they're adorable. And so moving into Evershore after Alanique's planet seemed like a really natural progression. And then getting to flesh out their planet and what it's like and what we've seen, what Hesho is like, and which of those attributes of Hesho are things that are cultural and which ones are just Hesho, because he's Hesho.
Yeah, in Spanish, there is, we had this, she's an actress, she's called Paula Iwasaki, and she's the one who narrated the book, the Defiant book, and she did an amazing work with Hesho, because Hesho has a profound voice, and he explained that what she wanted to transmit to people is that he was tiny, he's like this, tiny, but still he was like really honorable, and he was like a leader, and then he had like this voice that is calm, and she was also thinking. He reads poetry, and he gave him such a voice, because she said, you know, the easy thing would have been to give him a voice like this because he's tiny. And she was like, no, I think this character deserves something else. And Hesho in the audiobook in Spanish, I haven't heard it in English, I think. No, I don't think so. But in Spanish, he really sounds amazing. And all the mythology of, it's shocking that you arrived to Evershore, and it feels like maybe like the adventures of Gulliver, you know?
Yes. Actually, there's a Gulliver's reference in there. Yeah.
I think so. And I arrived and it's like, oh my God, we are like fighting or trying to fight against tiny kitchen, like small kitchen that are in their flighting things. And it's like, how did you build Evershore?
I'm trying to remember. I remember the planet, one of the main influences for that is the Red Rock in southern Utah, Bryce Canyon and Zion's. I built the main city that they're on, the place where they land has this city that's built out of the cliff with all of this red rock and like the pinnacles and buttes and things. And that was the inspiration for that. And then I looked at all of everything Hesho had said about what their government structure was and their assembly and I tried to build out like, what would this look like if we landed and we had to like, we can't go in their buildings because they're built for people who are this tall and all of that. That was really fun.
I always imagine like when they were talking about Evershore, I don't know why, I was thinking something like a beach in Thailand where you arrive and you know, and then the Chinese, also these gorgeous mountains that they have with a lot of trees, and I was kind of mixing all of that in my head, and I was, I really liked it. And
that's awesome.
And it's funny because we don't see that, but for example, when we reach Defiant, the Kitsen are providing for food. So the Kitsen are providing food for humans, and the humans are kind of providing food for the Ordale. And Alanique is super happy with all the algae that they are eating. She's like, oh, and they're like, oh my God, I had plenty of that. And they are discovering flavors that on the beginning were for super rich people or something that was an old memory, and bringing all this culinary background to the story was amazing. So when the Skyward flight ends, how do you make it cohesive then with Defiant, and then trying to make it cohesive with Skyward flight?
Making it cohesive with Defiant was sort of Brandon's problem. And there was a lot of, he wrote a draft and then I read through it, and his continuity editor, Karen, read through it. And they made a lot of comments of like, actually, this is what happened in Skyward Flight. Actually, this is what we established. Actually, that's not what's happening. So then he could correlate it, because he had read it so long ago that he had to go back and remember. And I do that too. I turn in my drafts and the continuity editor comes back to me and says, actually, this is what really happened and you got to fix it now. And because it's hard to keep, it's a big continuity. It's hard to keep all that continuity in my head. I have no idea how they do it for the Cosmere. That's just, I mean, he has a department of people who that's their job, which is good. But then moving forward, of course, like I read Defiant, took lots of notes. And then as I move it into the new series, the big challenge is actually establishing everything again, but still also making it so that it doesn't bog down for people who've read the other books, because we're starting again at book 1, so we want you to be able to pick the books up there, and that was the beginning of that book. Took me a long time to write, longer than I wanted it to, but it was because I would write a chapter and be like, yeah, but I didn't establish all this stuff, I better back up. And then I'd write the chapter again and I'd be like, but I think I need to back up again. I'd back up further, and I ended up starting 4 or 5 chapters before my outline did, just because there was a lot of things where it's like, okay, we've got to make sure that the reader knows these things that are important that you may or may not remember from the other books, even if you've read them. I'm just reestablishing the world so that we can move forward in it again.
Oh, well, that's super good to know. So we can tell people that even if they haven't read like the previous books, they can jump into the Citoverse, starting with
hopefully. That's our goal.
Yeah,
that's our goal. Yeah.
Otherwise, we can also like ask Karen. I thought that Karen was the Cosmere continuity editor, but now the Citoverse is also getting bigger, and then you also need. So we can talk with her about kids and Tynex. Great.
Yes. Yeah. Karen she saves me. She'll be like, that's not what happened, Janci. Fix it.
Also, I think it's also the beauty of the wikis. Once we talked with Brandon, and he told us that sometimes he actually also goes to the wiki because it's easier to look for something. He said, okay, that happened. And
I use the Coppermind all the time. And if I don't know the answer, sometimes I go to the 17th shard and I'm like, hey, you guys remember where this is? Can you find it? I can't find it. That and my 12-year-old daughter, because she's read the books a ton of times. So she's my first continuity person. And I say, hey, Corey, do you know where this is? And she usually knows where it is.
We had this project, and we are working also on the Coppermind. We have the Coppermind being translated into Spanish. And
awesome.
Yeah. And it was something we wanted to do for a while. And because there is a lot of information, and it really helps us to keep pace with the things.
Yeah.
And sometimes I also go there, and at the beginning I felt bad, like I should remember this. And then I was like, if Brandon himself cannot remember, it's okay if I don't either. So
yes.
It's impossible.
And sometimes I think the fans are better at it than we are remembering stuff. I mean, Brandon, obviously, he's got so much to remember. He remembers a lot of it better than me, but it's just too much to keep in your head.
Yeah, for me, it's like I have terrible memory, and sometimes I read something, and next week I won't be even able to remember. So it's like, it's amazing that I remember some details and some names.
And I intentionally try to like put things out of my mind. Like right now, while Brandon has my book, I'm trying not to think about it too much and trying to just like set it aside, because then the more I can get it out of my brain, the better it'll be when I sit down to look at it again. I'll look at it with fresh eyes and I'll see things that I didn't see last time when I went over it, when I was this close to it, you know? And so in some ways it's a skill to just be like, I remember nothing, I'm going to read it fresh and see what it says. But then when I have to remember continuity, it's not so great.
So how many drafts do you usually do before a book is, let's say, finished?
So when I was early in my career, I did a lot of drafts. Now I usually do my first draft and then my second draft before anyone reads it, because I have a list that I keep as I write of all the stuff that's wrong with it. And I go through and I fix all of that and I read through it and fix anything that I find my first time through. So second draft is the one people read. And then that one will go to like beta readers, or when I'm working with Brandon, it goes to Brandon and the editor. And so then I'll do probably 2 more drafts to get the story right. And then after that, we do line edit, proofread, and galleys once it's in print. So that's 8 drafts.
Oh my God.
It could be as few as 7 if I didn't need more than one content draft, but probably between 7 and 8.
When you were saying like on the beginning, so how did you start your career?
So when I was in college, was trying to decide what to major in. I had a whole list and I was taking classes and all the different majors trying to decide what I wanted to do. And I crossed everything off my list. And in the meantime, for fun, I started writing a novel. And I finished the novel and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I majored in English and kept writing books.
I think you were studying at the same university as Brandon. The two of you were studying at the same place?
Yeah. So when I was a senior in college, he was a grad student. And so I took his class. The first year he taught the class that he teaches at BYU. I took his class, but then I also took some graduate level courses. So we also had classes together. So he was just a little bit ahead of me in school. And that was how we met, is I took his class and then we had the class together. And then we started doing critique group together after that.
This is something we asked also Brandon some time ago, I think maybe last year. When I come to think, it's something that I always had on my mind. Of all the names that you could have given to your company, it's not Brandon's books, Dragon Steel books. It's entertainment, you know? Back when they created this, they weren't thinking about just books.
Yeah.
It's like they were thinking, and sometimes I wonder if you now go back and how am I going to tell my old Janci that I'm going to write this Citoverse that for me, it's one of the Citoverse should have an adaptation. I mean, I can really see it.
Yeah.
It has action, it has feelings, the characters are amazing. You can create,
I think it would make a good TV show. I think that would be really cool.
It really would be. I mean, I know that people are maybe in this industry, we don't have yet like an adaptation, but this science fiction would appeal not just for young people. I mean, it's a story for everybody, especially when you are with the last, let's say, book, without saying too much. I think it's amazing to have this group of friends, you know, each other for a very long while, and you are all together working on this. And maybe we will have, I don't know, besides the plushies, we will have a role-playing game of the Citoverse. We will have, I'm pretty sure the Citoverse is meant to have an adaptation. So what would you think? I mean, if you go back and saw them.
That would be crazy. I have thought many times that I wish I could go back to my friend Brandon, whose book, I met him, Elantris hadn't come out yet. He'd sold it, but it hadn't come out yet. And I would love to go back to him and be like, someday you're going to have conventions where people come from all over, and they're going to, you know, people all over the world, millions of people are going to be fanatically obsessed with your books. But, you know, I think Brandon would have believed it, because I think he would have been happy and excited, but I think he always had that just like preternatural confidence that he was going to change the genre and he was going to change the world. And it's hard to argue with his results.
Yeah, I know. And we can see it in the Spanish fandom. I mean, we are even making this convention and trying to, because we would love to have something like the Dragon Steel, but we cannot have something in person yet. Yeah. Maybe I think that one day we will be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
But we have enough content to talk about all these topics for a whole week. Whole week, and we could still be dissecting everything. So it's bonkers.
And then he keeps putting out more.
Yeah, we were like, I love Brandon, but I have plenty of books, non-Brandon books that I don't have time to read. It's like I have a pile. Because he's great with let's say, with the world building and the magic and the stuff. But for example, when I read, for example, Joe Abercrombie, he's completely different. He's super into characters and they are realistic. I mean, everything poor people that happens to them. It's like, I'm not sure if I would like to read fantasy to have this, but you can see the difference. And still, the world that Brandon is creating is huge. I wonder what's going to happen now that also Dan West is working in the company. I'm not sure if he's going to be involved in the non-Cosmere books. I think he's going to be involved in the Cosmere books for now. Yeah. How do you see the Citoverse expanding behind the Skyward Legacy? Because I think that there are plenty of stories to tell. I even would love to go back to why the Delvers, why did that happen?
Yeah. And there's like some weird stuff going on with like, there were Delvers before there were Delvers, like, and I want to know what's going on there. Maybe I'll get to write about that. I feel like the big determiner for how much we get to do in the Citoverse is how much people want to read it, right? So if you want more Citoverse, read the next books. Let the publisher know and let Dragonsteel know that this is still something there's a demand for. Because that's the question is, will people be done after Spence's story? Do they want more? Will they pick up the next book and will they buy it and will they read it and will they love it in the same way? And I hope they do, because I would love to write more.
Yeah.
But we'll just see what happens.
I think people are afraid of it sometimes. What happens with, let's say, with One World if Brandon is not writing it? And from how I see the topic, I've been reading comic books. I think we talked once about this. I've been reading comic books from, I don't know, since I was 6 years old, maybe, or maybe 5. And I'm used to have a world. In my case, was mutants. On the beginning, for me, the writer was Chris Claremont, and then someone took over that, and everybody gives or adds their own impressions to the story, and that's good as well. And you don't have to be afraid of someone like bringing a fresh air or another point of view, because, for example, we love Brandon, but he wouldn't been able, and I think this is why you are working together, who wouldn't been able to give the characters in the Skyward world the things that you gave them.
He can't write as many books as he would love to write. Even he has limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have more expertise in the emotions, and because you have more expertise in these emotions and building the relationships, we feel that they are real young people living in this, and that's something that maybe Brandon wouldn't have the time to do. So this is the beauty of working with others. So
and I am hyper aware every moment writing these books that there's an existing audience, and like thinking about that audience and about you guys and what it is that you want out of the Citoverse and what you love about it and what you want to see more of. People talk in the forums and on Reddit about like, what about this? We didn't, this wasn't covered. Oh, this never got followed up on. And you better believe I'm taking notes, right? What do people want to see? Because I want to write the books you guys want to read. And like, to some extent, I can't be Brandon, right? I have to lean into my own strengths and my own voice. But at the same time, I can make choices within that are more in line with what Brandon's readers want to see. And I may not always do that perfectly, but I am trying 100% of the time to deliver the sort of story that Citoverse readers want and love and will continue to want and love in the future.
I think we love you, and you don't need to be Brandon, I mean.
Yeah, and nobody you can't ever be another author, right? But it's fun. To me, I really enjoy looking at another author's strengths and trying to stretch myself to write more like that. And it's not just when I'm working with a co-author either. When I'm writing, say, like I'm working on starting a new rom-com series myself without a co-writer. And I've been reading, right now I'm still in the outlining stages, and I've been reading a ton of rom-coms and looking at like what really makes me fall in love with these couples, what really makes me just not want to put down a book, and studying what the authors are doing to try and grow and do more of that in my own work. And so I think some of that's just being a writer, but then with the co-writing, there's like a specific, like, this is going to be a Brandon book. And what do I need to do with it to make it a book that when people see Brandon's name on the cover and they pick it up, they feel like, yeah, that was a Brandon book, even though he wasn't the one who wrote all the words. And I think it's a fun challenge to stretch and to try to grow like that.
Yeah, I think it's also like, I think it's a good challenge. I think that people really also need to learn and appreciate what you as Janci bring, I mean, I think that's the good thing of building something together, that there are things and, let's say, details that just you can bring to the table. And that's also what also makes these characters brighter as well. Yeah. So it's not that I don't love Brandon, but I also want people to give you credit for your work.
Thank you,
Janci, because this is what you've done. And I had more fun with the Skyward flight, for example, that I was lost in Cytonic. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I understood that it was a book that needed to be there so I could understand things that will lead me to understand, like the ending. There is some preparation. When you have a trilogy, usually the second book, it's kind of the bridge between what you read on the beginning and how is it going to be like the ending. And this is what...
Well, and Spence is a little bit lost in that book. And so it makes sense as a reader to feel a little bit lost with her. And it's a harder plot archetype to pull off than something that is like, we're going for a goal and we're going for the goal the whole time. So that makes sense.
Exactly. But then I had tons of fun. And when I have two friends, they are also the admins of the Spanish wiki, the coppermine.es.
Mm-hmm.
And we were discussing, they were the ones who read first the Defiant book. And they were like, oh, you need to read that because how, like the Skyward Flight and then the characters and the lines. Like, there is a lot of preparation also here, so we can understand what happens on the film. I think it's fair to give the credit for that.
Thank you. Also, speaking of like the Cosmere readers who maybe like need some incentive to move over, if you are one of those Cosmere readers who are like, I love Brandon so much, but I wish he had more romance, I gotcha. And if you're one of those Cosmere readers who's like, I like that there's not very much romance, I'm afraid to read Janci's books because I'm afraid there'll be so much romance. I don't pour tons and tons of romance in them. I'm aware that not everybody wants that, and I keep it like, I try to, it's there because I can't have it not be there. That's just me. But also, I don't let it take over the stories because I know that's not what the whole audience wants. So either camp you're in, you can still come over to the Citoverse and you'll be okay.
But you know what's interesting? I mean, if you're young, romance, it's like the world. I mean, they are at war. But if they were at war, the most important topic in their life would be romance. I mean, what's going on with me? What's going on with them? What's going on with everybody?
Developmentally, that's where they're at.
Exactly. I mean, that's the age where you are starting to worry about all of the things. And by the way, we haven't talked about that, but I loved Hyper Thief. The story has not yet been translated into Spanish, but I was reading, and it's just like so lovely. I mean,
I had so much fun with that. Dan Wells actually was in charge of that project, and he contracted me to write it. And he basically was just like, he came into Dragonsteel and he hadn't read all of Brandon's books. So he's trying to catch up on things, and he hadn't gotten to the Skyward books yet. So he was like, I can't tell you what to write because I don't know what these books are about yet. So just write something. And I was like, oh, write something. Okay. And so I sent them, I wrote an outline of that, and I was like, run this by Brandon and see what he thinks. I'm pretty sure he's going to say no. And then he loved it. So that made me really happy.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Dan, because we mentioned this before, but I started to read The Hyper Thief, and Dan is also always into the food haste and everything. And I'm like, all the timings are like stealing food and everything. And the story is like so cute. And you know, one of the things that this woman does amazingly, incredibly well, Paula Iwasaki, the voice actress, she has a voice for the Tinics. When it's like, oh, and you can like imagine them with that, like they are actually flirting, and it's lovely. And I don't know, all the tenderness that it's there. Like FM has a lot of work, Rick has a lot of work. She thinks that everybody has like forgotten about her, and then this happens. And it's like, oh, it's really lovely.
Yeah, I wanted to do something fun and something with the Tanics, of course, because that's what everybody wants to read, including me.
Which is your favorite race? You can be like, you don't have to say the Tinics, if whatever it is.
Oh, my favorite. Oh, that's so hard. Maybe the Kitson?
The Kitson.
Maybe, but also maybe the Tanics. I love them.
The last time when I remember I went into Brandon's store to buy something, and then I saw all the Tinics. No more plushies, please. I hope that they do a new like they bring more, because I wanted the one that is like rainbow Tinics, and I wanted the rainbow Tinics, and the gray one, I think it's like Cubs, kind of. Tinics Cubs, I don't know. By the way, Cubs and Gran, the characters are super, super cool. Them helping the young people, but still they have to give them space. It was amazing. So, and besides like the Citoverse, are you also writing something? Because you mentioned a novel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm working on right now, I mean, I have most of my other series that I was working on are finished. So I'm working on starting something new. And so the book that I'm working on right now, it's a King Lear adaptation, but it's a science fiction horror with robots. And so Lear is like an engineer and also a wizard where he's taken pieces of his soul and put them into robots. There's these androids who are sentient. And so a lot of the characters are androids. And then it's about his three daughters as he sort of loses his mind, because as he removes his soul from himself and puts them in the robots, he's slowly going crazy. And then, of course, like if you know how King Lear goes, you know, there's a big storm and everybody dies. So I'm working on a revision right now of that. I'm excited about it.
Oh,
it's weird, but I
weird.
think it's turning out awesome.
Really is good. So
Yeah.
because would you say that maybe because you were more in touch with science fiction, now you are also willing to write more?
Yeah, maybe. I came up with this idea like 24 years ago, like a long time ago.
Wow.
And it just never, like, I've got like my list of things I might write next, and it just never made it to the top. And then as my other collaborative series wound down, it was like, well, what do I want to start? And I was so excited to finally be able to get to this one. But I've been thinking about this book for a lot of years.
Oh my God. So it's been brewing there with all the stories.
Yeah, it's been simmering back there for a long time, and that I think that helps. That I've been thinking about it for so long, and it's ready now. So
when do you think we will be able to read that?
So it depends. I'm gonna finish it and I'm gonna send it to my agent. And since it's a new series, we're gonna send it out and see if a publisher wants it. So hopefully a publisher picks it up, and sometime in the next few years, hopefully, we'll see.
Oh. Well, so we can wait for the new King Lear with androids. Everybody dies. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Janci, for being with us. It's been a total pleasure. I really want you to know that we appreciate you because of the stories of you write. Even though they are co-author, you know, the work we really appreciate the work you do with the characters and everything that you bring into the Citoverse. It's really amazing. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to get to write in these worlds, not just because of the books, but because of the fans. Like, you guys are just the most welcoming, wonderful fandom, and I'm just so grateful to get to be a part of it.
So maybe we will be talking next year. I don't remember if the first book, which is now called, is it next year or 2026?
So I think it's next year, but we don't have an exact date yet, partly because we're waiting to finalize the timeline until Brandon gets it read. And he's got a few things going on right now. He's in the middle of Stormlight revisions, and that has to be done. And so once he's done, then we'll be able to say, okay, this is definitely when it's being turned in, and this is when it comes out. But I believe the plan is still next year.
Perfect. So then we may have time to talk about it on the 2025 CosmereCon.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love to do that.
Thank you, Janci. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.